A throne for a woman who didn't want it. Bianca Vitali had never feared the men her father worked with until the night he lost everything. When her family's empire burned, there was only one man left standing, Matteo Greco. He tilted his glass, watching her with quiet amusement. "Your father bet on the wrong man," he murmured. "Now I make the rules." Chapter 1. The night the empire fell. The scent of smoke still clung to the air, a phantom reminder of the inferno that had consumed the Vitali estate. Bianca Vitali stood on the edge of what had once been a sprawling garden, now a charred wasteland reflecting the devastation of her family's legacy. The opulent villa, a symbol of her father's power and influence, was reduced to a skeletal frame against the bruised twilight sky. She wrapped her cashmere shawl tighter around her shoulders, a futile attempt to ward off the chill that seeped deeper than bone, a coldness that mirrored the icy fear gripping her heart. Just hours ago, this place had pulsed with life. The annual Vitali Gala, a glittering affair attended by the city's elite and those who operated in its shadows, had been in full swing. Laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, the murmur of deals being struck in hushed tones, all of it had been abruptly silenced by the roar of flames and the staccato bursts of gunfire. Bianca had been upstairs, changing her dress after a clumsy waiter had spilled wine on her. She remembered the sudden, jarring silence, followed by screams that pierced the night. She had rushed to the window, her heart hammering against her ribs, and witnessed the chaos unfolding below. Men in dark suits, their faces obscured by the flickering firelight, moved with brutal efficiency, their weapons spitting death. Her father's men, caught off guard, fell like dominoes. She had wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but a paralyzing fear had rooted her to the spot. It was a fear unlike anything she had ever known, a primal terror that whispered of the end of everything she held dear. It wasn't the fire itself, nor the violence, but the chilling realization that her life, as she knew it, was over. Now, standing amidst the ruins, the reality of her situation crashed down upon her with the force of a physical blow. Her father, Don Antonio Vitali, the man who had ruled his empire with an iron fist and a velvet glove, was gone.
Dead.
Along with most of his loyal soldiers. Her brothers, Alessandro and Lorenzo, always vying for their father's approval, their futures mapped out within the family business, also gone. The vibrant tapestry of her life had been ripped apart, leaving only frayed edges and gaping holes. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of her mother, Isabella, who had died when Bianca was just a child. Isabella, with her gentle smile and unwavering strength, a woman who had navigated the treacherous waters of the mafia world with grace and dignity. Bianca longed for that strength now, that unwavering certainty in the face of adversity. But all she felt was a hollow ache, a profound sense of loss that threatened to swallow her whole. A throat cleared behind her, the sound sharp and distinct in the otherwise silent night. Bianca didn't need to turn to know who it was.
Matteo Greco.
The man who had orchestrated this night of carnage, the man who now held her fate in his hands. He moved with a predatory grace, his tall frame silhouetted against the dying embers of the fire. Matteo was a study in contrasts. His tailored suit, impeccably cut, spoke of wealth and sophistication, but the hard glint in his dark eyes hinted at a ruthlessness that lay just beneath the surface. He had the face of a fallen angel, beautiful and dangerous, with a sharp jawline and a mouth that could curve into a disarming smile or tighten into a cruel line. His hair, the color of midnight, was swept back from his forehead, revealing a faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a memento of a past he rarely spoke of. He stopped a few feet away, the distance between them a palpable chasm of power and vulnerability. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the scent of smoke mingling with a subtle, expensive cologne. He wore a scent that would forever be etched in Bianca's memory, a sensory trigger to this night of terror. "Bianca," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a question, but a statement, an acknowledgement of her presence and, perhaps, her surrender. She forced herself to meet his gaze, her chin lifted in a defiant gesture that belied the trembling in her hands. "Matteo," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady, a testament to the years of training she had received in maintaining composure, even in the face of the most powerful men. It was a skill honed from childhood, a necessity for a woman in her world. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes, dark and unreadable, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Your father bet on the wrong man," he murmured, his voice devoid of any trace of remorse or regret. "Now I make the rules." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. They were a pronouncement of his victory, a declaration of his dominance. Bianca knew what he meant. Her father, in a desperate attempt to expand his territory, had challenged the wrong rival family, the Salerni. He had sought Matteo's support, offering him a lucrative partnership in exchange for his backing. But Matteo, ever the strategist, had seen an opportunity to seize it all. He had played both sides, fueling the conflict between the Vitales and the Salerni, until the opportune moment to strike presented itself. "Tonight." "And what rules are those, Matteo?" Bianca asked, her voice laced with a subtle defiance that surprised even herself. She knew she was walking a tightrope, that one wrong word could send her plummeting into the abyss. But she couldn't help it. A flicker of the old Bianca, the spirited, independent woman who had always chafed under the constraints of her family's expectations, refused to be extinguished. A faint smile played on his lips, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Survival, primarily," he said, his gaze sweeping over the ruins of her home. "Loyalty."
"And
"Obedience." The last word was spoken with a deliberate emphasis, a subtle warning that sent a fresh wave of fear coursing through her veins. Bianca understood the implications. She was now his. A prize of war, a pawn in his game. Her future, her freedom, her very life, were at his mercy. He took a step closer, closing the distance between them. The heat from the dying embers radiated outwards, a stark contrast to the coldness of his presence. "Your father made many mistakes, Bianca," he continued, his voice softening slightly, a deceptive gentleness that made her even more wary. "But his biggest mistake was underestimating me." Bianca remained silent, her gaze fixed on his. She refused to show him her fear, to give him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She would survive this. She would find a way to navigate this new, dangerous world, to protect herself, and perhaps even to reclaim a semblance of the life that had been stolen from her. He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her face. She flinched, instinctively recoiling from his touch, but he didn't press. His fingers, long and elegant, curled into a fist, and he lowered his hand. "You have spirit, Bianca," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "I admire that. But spirit alone will not be enough. You will need to learn the rules of this game. And you will need to learn them quickly." He paused, his gaze locking with hers. "Your father owed me a debt," he said, his voice hardening once more. "A debt that now falls to you." Bianca's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what was coming. This was the moment of truth, the moment that would define her future. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. His smile returned, but this time it was devoid of any warmth. It was the smile of a predator who had cornered his prey. "Everything," he said softly. "I want everything your father had. And I want you." The last word, possessive and absolute, was the final nail and the beginning of her new reality. There was a stirring, a flicker of something she had buried long ago. Defiance. Chapter 2. A bargain struck in shadows. The silence that followed Matteo's pronouncement was thick with unspoken implications. The air, still heavy with the scent of smoke and the ghosts of shattered lives, seemed to press down on Bianca, suffocating her. Everything. He wanted everything. The words echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder of the power he now wielded over her. Her family's businesses, their assets, their connections, and her. She forced herself to meet his gaze, her own eyes narrowed in a mixture of fear and defiance. "Everything?" she repeated, her voice betraying a slight tremor despite her best efforts to control it. And what does that entail, precisely? Matteo's lips curved into that slow, predatory smile that sent shivers down her spine. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. The heat from his body was a stark contrast to the chill of the night, a tangible reminder of his physicality, his dominance. "It entails your cooperation, Bianca," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to resonate deep within her chest. "Your compliance. Your father's empire is now mine. But empires need managing. And you, my dear Bianca, have a unique understanding of your father's affairs." He paused, his dark eyes searching hers, probing for any sign of weakness, any hint of rebellion. Bianca held his gaze, refusing to flinch, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. She had spent her entire life surrounded by powerful men, learning to navigate their egos, their ambitions, their hidden agendas. She knew how to play the game, how to mask her emotions, how to present a facade of composure even when her insides were churning with turmoil. "I understand my father's businesses," she admitted, her voice carefully neutral. "But I am not my father." "No," Matteo agreed, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You are not. You are more resourceful, more adaptable. Your father was blinded by his pride, his arrogance. He believed he was untouchable. You, I suspect, are more pragmatic." He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek. Bianca stiffened, resisting the urge to pull away. His touch, though seemingly gentle, was a clear assertion of his power, a reminder that she was now under his control. "I need someone I can trust, Bianca," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Someone who understands the intricacies of this world, someone who can help me consolidate my power, someone who will be loyal." The word loyal hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. Bianca knew that loyalty in this world was a double-edged sword. It could be a shield, protecting her from harm, but it could also be a cage, trapping her in a life of servitude. "And if I refuse?" she asked, the question a calculated risk. She needed to know the boundaries of her confinement, the extent of his control. Matteo's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard expression that sent a fresh wave of fear through her. "Refusal is not an option, Bianca," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Your family is gone. You have no one. I am all that stands between you and oblivion." He let the words sink in, allowing her to fully grasp the precariousness of her situation. She was alone, vulnerable, completely at his mercy. He could crush her with a single word, a single gesture. Bianca swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had always known that the world of the mafia was brutal, unforgiving. But she had never imagined that she would become a victim of its ruthlessness. She had always been on the periphery, protected by her family's name, their power. Now, that protection was gone, and she was exposed, naked, to the harsh realities of this life. But she was not defeated.
Not yet.
She had inherited her mother's resilience, her father's cunning. She would survive this. She would find a way to navigate this treacherous path, to protect herself, and perhaps even to turn the tables on Matteo Greco. "I understand," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "What do you propose?" Matteo's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. He had expected resistance, perhaps even tears. But Bianca had surprised him. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a spark of defiance, a hint of steel. It was a quality he admired, a quality that made her even more valuable to him. "I propose a partnership, Bianca," he said, his voice regaining its smooth, persuasive tone. "A mutually beneficial arrangement. You will help me manage your father's businesses, advise me on his connections, his secrets. In return, I will provide you with protection, security, and a comfortable life." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You will live in my home, under my protection. You will have access to all the luxuries you are accustomed to. You will be treated with respect." The offer was tempting, a lifeline in a sea of despair. But Bianca knew that it came with a price. She would be a prisoner in his gilded cage, a puppet dancing to his tune. But what choice did she have? Refusal meant certain death, or worse. And what about freedom? She asked, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. Mateo's smile widened, a hint of mockery in his eyes. Freedom is an illusion, Bianca, he said softly. We are all prisoners of our circumstances, our obligations, our desires. You will have a degree of freedom within certain parameters. But ultimately, you will be bound to me. He stepped even closer, his breath warm against her ear. But perhaps, he whispered, you will find that being bound to me is not such a terrible fate. The words were a challenge, a seduction, a threat, all rolled into one. Bianca felt a confusing mix of fear and something else. A flicker of something that resembled desire, a dangerous attraction to this powerful, ruthless man. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to regain control of her racing heart. She needed to think clearly, to assess her options, to find a way to survive this without losing herself completely. I need time to think, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mateo chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent another shiver down her spine. Time is a luxury you do not have, Bianca, he said. But I will grant you this night. Consider my offer carefully. Your future depends on it. He turned to leave, his tall frame disappearing into the shadows. Bianca watched him go, her mind reeling. She was trapped, caught in a web of power and intrigue. But she was not broken. She would find a way to use this partnership to her advantage. She would learn his secrets, his weaknesses. And she would wait for the opportune moment to strike. She looked up at the sky, at the faint glimmer of dawn breaking through the darkness. A new day was beginning, a new chapter in her life. A chapter filled with danger, uncertainty, and perhaps a glimmer of hope. The hope she could somehow break free from this devil's deal. The hope she wasn't alone in this sentiment was a powerful drug. Chapter 3. The Weight of Unspoken Words. The dawn painted the sky in hues of bruised purple and pale orange, a stark contrast to the lingering darkness that clung to Bianca's soul. Mateo's words, I want you, echoed in her mind, a relentless reminder of the bargain struck in the shadows. She hadn't slept. Instead, she had wandered through the remnants of her former life, each charred beam and shattered window a testament to her family's downfall and her own precarious future. The grand library, once filled with leather-bound books and the comforting scent of old paper, was now a hollow shell, open to the elements. Bianca ran her hand over the scorched spine of a book, her father's favorite copy of Machiavelli's The Prince. A bitter irony, she thought. Her father had lived by Machiavelli's principles, and yet he had still fallen prey to a more cunning adversary. She found a small, relatively undamaged alcove, overlooking what had once been the rose garden, her mother's favorite place. A single, resilient rosebush, miraculously untouched by the flames, bloomed defiantly amidst the devastation. Bianca closed her eyes, inhaling the faint, sweet fragrance, a fleeting memory of a time when life felt safe and predictable. She thought of her mother, Isabella. A woman of quiet strength and unwavering grace, Isabella had navigated the treacherous waters of the mafia world with a dignity that Bianca now desperately craved. Isabella had understood the unspoken rules, the delicate balance of power, the constant threat of betrayal. She had taught Bianca the importance of composure, of observation, of strategic silence. Words are weapons, Cara, she used to say. Use them wisely. Bianca now understood the full weight of those words. Her silence, her carefully chosen responses, had been her only defense against Mateo's overwhelming power. But silence could also be a prison, trapping her unspoken fears, her doubts, her simmering resentment. She opened her eyes, gazing at the sunrise. The beauty of it felt almost obscene, a cruel juxtaposition to the ugliness of her reality. She felt a profound sense of loneliness, a yearning for connection, for someone who understood the burden she carried. Her brothers, Alessandro and Lorenzo, were gone. Their constant bickering, their rivalry for their father's attention, seemed trivial now, a distant memory of a life that was irretrievably lost. She wondered if they had known, in their final moments, the extent of their father's folly. Had they felt the same paralyzing fear that had gripped her? A sound behind her made her jump. She turned, her heart pounding, expecting to see Matteo. But it was Sophia, one of the few remaining household staff who had somehow survived the night of carnage. Sophia, a stout, middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a weathered face, had been with the Vitali family for decades. She was more than a servant, she was a confidant, a surrogate mother figure, especially after Isabella's death. Sophia stood in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed with grief, her apron stained with soot. She held a small, silver tray, bearing a cup of steaming espresso and a single, perfect biscotti. "Signorina Bianca," she said, her voice hoarse with emotion. I thought you might need this." Bianca felt a lump form in her throat. Sophia's simple act of kindness, a small gesture of normalcy in a world turned upside down, brought tears to her eyes. She managed a weak smile.
Grazie, Sophia.
Sophia set the tray down on a nearby table, her hands trembling. She looked at Bianca, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and concern. It's all gone, Signorina," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Everything." Bianca nodded, unable to speak. She couldn't bear to see the pain in Sophia's eyes, a reflection of her own grief. Sophia hesitated, then took a tentative step closer. "Signorina," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Signor Greco, he is a dangerous man. Be careful." Bianca met Sophia's gaze, acknowledging the unspoken warning. She knew that Sophia had witnessed more than she let on, that she understood the intricate web of alliances and betrayals that governed this world. "I know, Sophia," she replied, her voice steady. "I will be careful." Sophia nodded, seemingly relieved. "Your mother, God rest her soul, she would have wanted you to be strong, Signorina. She would have wanted you to survive." Bianca felt a surge of determination. Sophia was right. Her mother would not have wanted her to succumb to despair. She would have wanted her to fight, to use her intelligence, her resilience, to navigate this new, dangerous reality. Sophia lingered for a moment longer, then quietly left the room, leaving Bianca alone with her thoughts and the growing weight of her unspoken fears. The espresso, strong and bitter, warmed her from the inside, a small comfort in the face of the overwhelming uncertainty that lay ahead. She looked out at the rose garden again, at the single, defiant bloom. A symbol of hope, perhaps. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, beauty and resilience could still exist. She knew that Matteo was waiting for her answer. He had given her the night to consider his offer, but the night was over. She had made her decision. She would accept his partnership, but on her own terms. She would play the game, learn the rules, and bide her time. She would use his ambition, his desire for control, against him. She would not be a victim. She would be a survivor. And perhaps, one day, she would be the one making the rules. The unspoken promise to herself was a lifeline. She would be ready. Chapter 4. Echoes of a Shattered Past. The drive to Matteo's estate was a blur of rain-slicked streets and blurred city lights. Bianca sat in the back of the luxurious black car, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery, her mind racing. She had given Matteo her answer, a carefully worded acceptance that masked her true intentions. He had seemed pleased, a flicker of satisfaction in his dark eyes, but she hadn't missed the underlying current of control, the subtle reminder that she was now his. The car pulled up to a gated entrance, guarded by two imposing men in dark suits. They recognized the vehicle and the gates swung open, revealing a long, winding driveway that led to a sprawling villa perched on a hilltop overlooking the city. The estate was even more impressive than she had imagined, a testament to Matteo's wealth and power. It was a fortress, a world unto itself, far removed from the chaos and destruction of her former life. As the car stopped in front of the imposing entrance, a uniformed chauffeur opened the door for her. Bianca stepped out, her legs feeling slightly unsteady. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The sheer scale of the villa, with its imposing stone facade and towering windows, was intimidating. Matteo was waiting for her at the top of the steps, his tall frame silhouetted against the warm glow of the interior lights. He wore a dark, tailored suit, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He extended a hand, a gesture of welcome that felt more like a claim of ownership. "Welcome to my home, Bianca," he said, his voice smooth and resonant. She took his hand, her own trembling slightly. His grip was firm, possessive, sending a shiver down her spine. She forced herself to meet his gaze, her own expression carefully composed. "Thank you, Matteo," she replied, her voice betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. He led her inside, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, a subtle but constant reminder of his presence, his control. The interior of the villa was even more opulent than the exterior, a lavish display of wealth and taste. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, intricate chandeliers, and priceless artwork adorned the walls. It was a world of unimaginable luxury, a stark contrast to the charred remnants of her former home. They walked through a series of grand rooms, each more impressive than the last. A vast entrance hall, a formal dining room with a table that could seat 20, a library filled with leather-bound books, a music room with a grand piano. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the soft click of their heels on the marble floors. Matteo led her to a smaller, more intimate room, a study overlooking the city lights. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the richly paneled walls and comfortable leather furniture. A bottle of wine and 2 glasses sat on a nearby table. "I thought we could talk," Matteo said, gesturing for her to sit in one of the armchairs facing the fire. Bianca sat down, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She felt a sense of unease, a feeling of being watched, assessed. She knew that this was a test, a subtle interrogation designed to probe her weaknesses, her vulnerabilities. Matteo poured 2 glasses of wine, a deep red that shimmered in the firelight. He handed her one, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. She took the glass, her hand steady, her gaze fixed on his. "To our partnership," he said, raising his glass in a toast. Bianca hesitated, then raised her own glass, meeting his gaze. "To our partnership," she echoed, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. They drank in silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant hum of the city below. Bianca felt the weight of his gaze on her, scrutinizing, probing. She knew that he was trying to understand her, to decipher her motives, to determine her loyalty. "You're quiet, Bianca," he said, breaking the silence. "What are you thinking?" She took a slow sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. "I'm thinking about my family," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "About what happened?" Matteo nodded, his expression softening slightly. "It was necessary," he said, his voice devoid of any remorse. "Your father made a mistake. He challenged me. He paid the price." "And my brothers?" Bianca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Matteo's gaze hardened. "They were casualties of war," he said coldly. "Collateral damage." Bianca felt a surge of anger, a burning resentment towards this man who had destroyed her family, her life. But she suppressed it, knowing that showing her emotions would be a sign of weakness. "I understand," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. "This is the way of things." Matteo studied her for a moment, his eyes searching hers. "You're adapting quickly, Bianca," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "That's good. You'll need to be strong to survive in this world." He paused, then leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. "But strength alone is not enough," he continued. "You'll also need to be resourceful, clever. You'll need to learn to play the game." Bianca met his gaze, her own eyes narrowed. "I'm a fast learner, Matteo," she said, her voice laced with a subtle defiance. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "I believe you are," he said. "And that's why I chose you, Bianca. You have the potential to be a valuable asset, a powerful ally." The word ally felt hollow, a mockery of the true nature of their relationship.
She was his prisoner, his pawn, not his ally.
But she knew that she needed to play along, to pretend to be what he wanted her to be, until she could find a way to turn the tables on him. He refilled their glasses, the wine a dark, shimmering pool in the firelight. The echoes of all that was shattered clawed their way back into her mind, insistent, refusing to leave. Chapter 5. Under Greco's watchful eye. The following days settled into a strange, unsettling routine. Bianca was given a luxurious suite of rooms, overlooking the meticulously manicured gardens. The rooms were filled with everything she could possibly need: a walk-in closet overflowing with designer clothes, a bathroom stocked with expensive toiletries, a private sitting room with a view that stretched for miles. It was a gilded cage, beautiful but confining. Matteo was a constant presence, his watchful eye always on her. He was polite, even charming, but there was always an underlying current of control, a subtle reminder of her precarious position. He treated her with a possessive courtesy, as if she were a prized possession, a valuable object to be admired and controlled. He insisted on having dinner with her every evening, a formal affair in the grand dining room. The meals were elaborate, multi-course affairs, prepared by a team of chefs. The food was exquisite, but Bianca found it difficult to enjoy, her appetite dulled by the constant tension and the weight of her unspoken fears. During these dinners, Matteo would talk about his business, his plans for expanding his empire, his strategies for dealing with rivals. He never explicitly asked for her advice, but he would often pause, his eyes searching hers, as if waiting for her to offer an opinion, a suggestion. She learned to navigate these conversations carefully, offering subtle insights, veiled criticisms, always maintaining a facade of respectful deference. He seemed to enjoy testing her, probing her knowledge of her father's business, her understanding of the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that governed their world. He was trying to gauge her loyalty, her usefulness, her potential for betrayal. Bianca, in turn, was observing him, studying his habits, his routines, his interactions with his men. She was looking for weaknesses, for vulnerabilities, for any information that could help her gain an advantage. She learned that he was a creature of habit, a man who valued order and control. He rose early, spent hours in his study, dealing with business matters, making calls, receiving visitors. He was ruthless, but he was also meticulous, a man who left nothing to chance. She also learned that he had a network of informants, spies who kept him informed of everything that happened in the city, in the underworld. He knew about every deal, every betrayal, every whispered conspiracy. It was a daunting realization, a reminder of the power he wielded, the extent of his reach. She was allowed to wander the estate, but she was always accompanied by one of Matteo's men, a silent, watchful guard who never left her side. She felt like a prisoner, her every move monitored, her every action scrutinized. One afternoon, she was walking in the gardens, admiring the meticulously manicured flower beds, when she saw Matteo standing on a balcony overlooking the city. He was talking on the phone, his voice low and urgent. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could sense the tension in his body, the sharpness of his tone. She watched him for a moment, intrigued. He was a complex man, a paradox of charm and ruthlessness. She found herself both repelled and fascinated by him, drawn to his power, his intelligence, his dangerous aura. As if sensing her presence, he turned and looked at her. His eyes, dark and unreadable, met hers across the distance. He said something into the phone, then ended the call. He beckoned her to join him. Bianca hesitated, then walked towards the balcony, her heart beating faster. She knew that this was another test, another opportunity for him to assess her, to probe her intentions. "Enjoying the view?" he asked, his voice smooth and casual. "It's beautiful," she replied, her gaze sweeping over the cityscape stretching out before them. "The city is mine, Bianca," he said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. "I control it. I own it." She looked at him, her eyes narrowed. "And what about the people who live in it?" she asked, her voice laced with a subtle challenge. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile.
They are my subjects, he said.
They serve me. They obey me. Bianca felt a surge of anger, a resentment towards his arrogance, his sense of entitlement. But she suppressed it, knowing that showing her emotions would be a mistake. Power comes with responsibility, Matteo, she said, her voice carefully neutral. He raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in his eyes. And you think I don't understand that? He asked. I think you have a unique perspective on responsibility, she replied, choosing her words carefully. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. You're a shrewd one, Bianca, he said. I like that. You're not afraid to speak your mind. I'm not afraid of you, Matteo, she said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. He stepped closer, his eyes locking with hers.
Perhaps not, he said softly. But you should be.
The threat, the unspoken, felt very clear at that moment. Yet so was a new resolve. Chapter 6. The Serpent's Charm and Promises. The days bled into weeks, and Bianca found herself increasingly drawn into Matteo's world, a world of opulent parties, clandestine meetings, and simmering tensions. He seemed to take a perverse pleasure in introducing her to his associates, his family, a collection of powerful and dangerous men who ruled the city's underworld. At these gatherings, Bianca played the role of the demure, compliant consort, always at Matteo's side, her smile carefully crafted, her words chosen with precision. She learned to navigate the complex social dynamics, to read the unspoken cues, to decipher the veiled threats and hidden agendas. She observed the way these men treated their wives, their mistresses, their daughters with a mixture of possessiveness and disdain. She saw the fear in their eyes, the constant striving for approval, the desperate attempts to maintain their position in this precarious hierarchy. She was determined not to become one of them. She would maintain her independence, her sense of self, even within the confines of Matteo's gilded cage. She would use her intelligence, her observations, to gain an advantage, to find a way to protect herself and, perhaps, one day, to escape. Matteo, meanwhile, seemed to be growing increasingly fascinated by her. He watched her constantly, his eyes lingering on her face, her body, his expression a mixture of desire and suspicion. He seemed to enjoy testing her, pushing her boundaries, trying to provoke a reaction, a crack in her carefully constructed facade. One evening, after a particularly lavish party at a rival Don's estate, Matteo led her to a secluded balcony overlooking the city lights. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of jasmine and distant sea salt. The city glittered below them, a vast, sprawling tapestry of light and shadow. You handled yourself well tonight, Bianca, he said, his voice a low murmur. You impressed Don Angelo. He's a difficult man to please. Bianca shrugged, her gaze fixed on the cityscape. I simply did what was expected of me, she replied, her voice carefully neutral. Matteo chuckled, a low, rumbling sound.
You did more than that, he said.
You charmed him. You disarmed him. You made him trust you. Bianca turned to look at him, her eyes narrowed. And why is that important? She asked. Matteo stepped closer, his body almost touching hers. He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek. She stiffened, resisting the urge to pull away. Because trust is a valuable commodity in this world, Bianca, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. And you, my dear, have a gift for inspiring it. He paused, his gaze intensifying. I need people I can trust, Bianca, he continued. People who are loyal, discreet, intelligent. People who can help me achieve my goals. Bianca felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that he was not simply talking about business. He was talking about her, about the role he wanted her to play in his life, in his empire. And what are your goals, Matteo? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a shiver of apprehension through her. To expand my power, he said softly. To consolidate my control. To become untouchable. He paused, his gaze locking with hers. And I want you to be a part of that, Bianca, he continued. I want you to be my confidant, my advisor, my partner. The word partner felt like a trap, a gilded cage disguised as an offer of equality. She knew that he would never treat her as a true partner, that she would always be subordinate to him, his possession. But she also knew that refusing him outright would be dangerous. She needed to play along, to bide her time, to gain his trust, until she could find a way to escape his clutches. "I'm flattered, Matteo," she said, her voice carefully modulated. "But I'm still learning. I don't know if I'm ready for such a responsibility." He laughed, a low, throaty sound that sent a shiver of both fear and excitement through her. "You underestimate yourself, Bianca," he said. "You have a natural talent for this world. You have the intelligence, the cunning, the ruthlessness to succeed." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "And I will teach you everything you need to know," he whispered. "I will show you how to wield power, how to manipulate, how to survive." His words were a seduction, a promise of power and influence, a temptation to embrace the darkness that surrounded them. Bianca felt a confusing mix of emotions: fear, excitement, revulsion, and a strange, undeniable attraction to this dangerous, compelling man. A serpent offering the apple. Only this time, she thought, she would not so easily take a bite. She looked at him, a glint in her eye. "And what if I don't want to learn your ways?" Chapter 7. Whispers of Rebellion and Desire. Matteo's smile widened at Bianca's defiant question, a flicker of amusement and something darker in his eyes. He seemed to relish her resistance, her refusal to simply submit to his will. It was a challenge, a game he clearly enjoyed playing. "Then you would be wasting your potential, Bianca," he said, his voice still low and intimate, his proximity both intoxicating and threatening. "You are not meant for a quiet life, a life of submission. You have fire in you, a spirit that refuses to be tamed. I saw it the night your father's empire fell. I see it now." He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, sending a shiver of awareness through her. She forced herself to remain still, to meet his gaze without flinching, to betray none of the conflicting emotions swirling within her. "And what if that fire burns you, Matteo?" she asked, her voice laced with a subtle challenge, testing the boundaries of his control, the limits of his patience. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. "Then I shall enjoy the heat," he replied, his gaze holding hers captive. "I am not afraid of fire, Bianca. I thrive on it." The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, a dangerous dance of desire and defiance. Bianca knew she was playing with fire, that one wrong move could have devastating consequences. But she couldn't help herself. A part of her, the part that had always chafed under the constraints of her family's expectations, the part that had always yearned for freedom and independence, was drawn to his challenge, his power, his dangerous allure. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear, his voice a seductive whisper. "But you are smart enough to know that rebellion without strategy is futile, Bianca," he murmured. "You need to learn the rules of the game, to understand the players, to master the art of manipulation. And I am the best teacher you could have." He paused, his gaze intensifying, his eyes searching hers, probing for any sign of weakness, any hint of surrender. Bianca held his gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "And what makes you so sure I want to learn from you?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of defiance, a flicker of the rebellious spirit he claimed to admire. His smile widened, a slow, predatory smile that sent a shiver of both apprehension and excitement through her. "Because you have no choice, Cara," he said softly. "You are mine now. And I will teach you everything you need to know to survive in this world, to thrive in it." The words were a possessive claim, a reminder of her captivity, but they also held a strange, undeniable appeal. She had always been drawn to power, to intelligence, to the thrill of the unknown. And Matteo, for all his ruthlessness, was undeniably powerful, intelligent, and intriguing. She felt a confusing mix of emotions: fear, resentment, attraction, and a strange, forbidden curiosity. She wanted to resist him, to defy him, But she also found herself drawn to his strength, his confidence, his dangerous charisma. "And what if I refuse to be your student?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, testing the limits of his patience, his control. His smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard expression that sent a chill down her spine. "Refusal is not an option, Bianca," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You will learn. You will adapt. You will obey." The word obey hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. Bianca knew that he was not a man to be trifled with, that he would not hesitate to use force, to crush any opposition, to maintain his control. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart, to regain control of her emotions. She needed to think clearly, to strategize, to find a way to navigate this dangerous path without losing herself completely. "I understand," she said, her voice carefully neutral, betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. "I will cooperate." Mateo's smile returned, but this time it was more of a smirk, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. He had won this round, but Bianca knew that the game was far from over. He stepped back, breaking the physical tension between them, but the emotional intensity remained. "Good," he said, his voice regaining its smooth, persuasive tone. "I knew you were smart, Bianca. I knew you would see reason." He gestured towards the city lights, spread out before them like a glittering carpet. "This is our world, Bianca," he said. "A world of power, of wealth, of opportunity. And together, we can rule it." The words were a temptation, a seduction, a promise of a life beyond her wildest dreams. But Bianca knew that it was a poisoned chalice, a Faustian bargain that would cost her her soul. She was playing his game, and whispering doubts had no place. Only survival. Chapter 8. The Ghosts of Old Alliances. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Mateo immersed Bianca in his world, introducing her to his key lieutenants, his business partners, and even some of his rivals. He took her to clandestine meetings in dimly lit backrooms, to lavish parties in opulent villas, to underground gambling dens where fortunes were won and lost on the turn of a card. Bianca observed everything, absorbing the intricate details of Mateo's operations, the complex web of alliances and rivalries that govern the city's underworld. She learned to read the unspoken cues, to decipher the veiled threats, to understand the delicate balance of power that kept this volatile world from erupting into all-out war. She discovered that Mateo's empire was built on a foundation of fear and respect, but also on a network of old alliances, forged through blood oaths and shared secrets. These alliances were often strained, threatened by shifting loyalties and ambitious rivals, but they were also surprisingly resilient, held together by a code of honor, a sense of shared history. One evening, Mateo took Bianca to a small, unassuming trattoria in a quiet neighborhood. The restaurant was owned by an old man named Salvatore, a former associate of Bianca's father. Salvatore greeted Mateo with a mixture of deference and suspicion, his eyes flickering towards Bianca with a hint of recognition and something else. Pity, perhaps? Or was it warning? They were seated at a secluded table in the back, away from the other diners. The air was thick with the aroma of garlic, oregano, and simmering tomato sauce. Salvatore himself served them, his hands trembling slightly as he poured the wine, a deep red Chianti. "Salvatore," Mateo said, his voice smooth and casual, "this is Bianca Vitali, my associate." Salvatore's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly composed himself, bowing his head respectfully. "Signorina Vitali," he said, his voice raspy with age. "It is an honor." Bianca met his gaze, her own expression carefully neutral. "The honor is mine, Signor Salvatore," she replied, her voice betraying none of the emotions she felt inside. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the clinking of cutlery and the murmur of conversations from other tables. Bianca could feel Salvatore's eyes on her, scrutinizing her, assessing her. She knew that he was remembering her father, remembering the old days, the alliances that had been forged and broken. "Your father was a good man, Signorina," Salvatore said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. "A strong man. But he made mistakes." Bianca nodded, her gaze fixed on her plate. Yes, she replied softly.
He did.
Matteo watched them both, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be enjoying the tension, the unspoken history that hung heavy in the air. The Salerni family, Salvatore continued, his voice low and urgent. They are not to be trusted. They are snakes. They will betray you at the first opportunity. Bianca looked up, meeting Salvatore's gaze. She saw a flicker of genuine concern in his eyes, a warning that seemed to come from a place of genuine affection for her family's legacy. I know, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. My father learned that the hard way. Matteo intervened, his voice sharp and commanding. Salvatore, he said, Bianca is under my protection now. She is safe. Salvatore looked at Matteo, his eyes filled with a mixture of doubt and resignation. He knew that Matteo was a powerful man, a dangerous man, but he also knew that the world of the mafia was a treacherous place, where alliances could shift in an instant, where loyalty was a fleeting commodity. The old alliances meant a safety that Bianca was no longer included in. I hope so, Signor Greco, Salvatore said, his voice barely audible. For her sake. The rest of the meal passed without further incident, but the tension remained, a palpable undercurrent beneath the surface of polite conversation. As they were leaving, Salvatore stopped Bianca, his hand resting lightly on her arm. Be careful, Signorina, he whispered, his voice urgent. This world, it changes people.
It consumes them.
Bianca nodded, her heart heavy with his warning. She knew that he was right. She had already seen how this world could corrupt, could destroy. She had seen it in her father, in her brothers, in the men who surrounded Matteo. She looked back at the trattoria, at the warm glow of the lights spilling out onto the quiet street. It felt like a relic of a bygone era, a reminder of a time when life was simpler, when loyalties were clearer, when the lines between right and wrong were not so blurred. The ghosts of these old alliances followed her, whispering warnings she would be a fool to ignore. And so, she filed them away, adding to her growing arsenal of information. It would protect her. Chapter 9. A dance on the edge of betrayal. The tension between Bianca and Matteo escalated, a subtle but palpable shift in their dynamic. He became more demanding, more possessive, his watchful, "I never leaving her." He seemed to be testing her constantly, pushing her boundaries, trying to provoke a reaction, a crack in her carefully constructed facade. Bianca, in turn, became more adept at playing the game, at masking her true emotions, at manipulating his expectations. She learned to anticipate his moods, to decipher his unspoken commands, to navigate the treacherous currents of his volatile personality. One evening, Matteo informed her that they would be attending a meeting with Don Carlo Rossi, the head of a rival family, a man known for his ruthlessness and his unpredictable temper. The meeting was ostensibly to discuss a potential business deal, but Bianca knew that it was also a test, a way for Matteo to gauge her loyalty, her ability to handle herself in a high-stakes situation. They arrived at Rossi's estate, a sprawling villa overlooking the sea. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken rivalries and hidden agendas. Rossi greeted Matteo with a forced cordiality, his eyes flickering towards Bianca with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Matteo, Rossi said, his voice a gravelly rasp. And this must be the lovely Bianca Vitali. I've heard much about you. Bianca met his gaze, her own expression carefully neutral. Don Rossi, she replied, her voice steady and respectful. It is a pleasure to meet you. Rossi's lips curled into a cynical smile. The pleasure is all mine, I assure you, he said, his eyes lingering on her with a predatory gleam. They were led to a lavishly decorated room, where a long table was set for a formal dinner. The other guests, members of Rossi's inner circle, were already seated, their faces a mixture of suspicion and hostility. Bianca felt a surge of apprehension, a feeling of being surrounded by enemies. She knew that she was walking on a tightrope, that one wrong word, one wrong move, could have disastrous consequences. Matteo placed a possessive hand on the small of her back, a subtle reminder of his control, his ownership. He guided her to her seat, next to him, at the opposite end of the table from Rossi. The dinner was a tense affair, filled with veiled threats and subtle power plays. Rossi seemed to be deliberately trying to provoke Matteo, to test his patience, to find a weakness. He made several pointed remarks about Bianca's father, about the Vitali family's downfall, his words laced with a cruel mockery. Bianca felt her anger rising, but she suppressed it, knowing that showing her emotions would be a mistake. She maintained a calm, composed demeanor, her smile fixed, her eyes betraying nothing. Matteo, however, seemed to be growing increasingly agitated. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, his hand clenched into a fist on the table. Bianca could sense the simmering rage beneath his controlled exterior. At one point, Rossi leaned towards Bianca, his voice low and insinuating. "Your father was a foolish man, Signorina," he said. "He underestimated his enemies. He paid the price." Bianca met his gaze, her own eyes unwavering. "My father made mistakes," she replied, her voice carefully modulated. "But he was not a fool.
He was betrayed."
The word betrayed hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. Rossi's eyes narrowed, his smile vanishing. He glanced at Matteo, his expression unreadable. Matteo intervened, his voice sharp and commanding. "Enough, Carlo," he said. "We are here to discuss business, not to rehash old grievances." Rossi shrugged, a cynical smile returning to his lips. "As you wish, Matteo," he said. "But I would advise you to be careful who you trust. Betrayal is a common occurrence in our world." The rest of the dinner passed without further incident, but the tension remained, a palpable undercurrent beneath the surface of polite conversation. As they were leaving, Rossi stopped Bianca, his hand resting lightly on her arm. "Be careful, Signorina," he whispered, his voice urgent. "Matteo Greco is not a man to be trusted. He is a serpent. He will use you, and then he will discard you." Bianca nodded, her heart heavy with his warning. She knew that Rossi was right. She had seen the ruthlessness in Matteo's eyes, the cold calculation that governed his actions. She looked back at Rossi, a flicker of something akin to gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Don Rossi," she said softly. "I appreciate your concern." Rossi's lips curled into a cynical smile. "Don't thank me, Signorina," he said. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for myself. Matteo Greco is my enemy, and I will use any means necessary to destroy him." The words echoed in her mind, a clear message. She was a pawn in everyone's game. She knew that she was surrounded by enemies, that she could trust no one. She had to protect herself. Chapter 10. Unmasking the heart of the enemy. The encounter with Don Rossi left Bianca shaken, but also more determined than ever to uncover Matteo's true intentions. She had played the role of the compliant consort, the obedient student, but she knew that it was only a matter of time before Matteo's mask slipped, before his true nature was revealed. She began to pay closer attention to his interactions with his men, to the subtle cues, the unspoken communications that revealed the inner workings of his organization. She listened in on phone calls, discreetly observed meetings, and even ventured into his study when he was absent, searching for clues, for any information that could give her an advantage. She discovered that Matteo was involved in a complex web of illicit activities, far beyond what she had initially imagined. He controlled not only the city's gambling and prostitution rackets, but also a vast network of smuggling, extortion, and money laundering operations. He had connections in high places, politicians, law enforcement officials, judges, all bought and paid for, ensuring his continued dominance. She also discovered that he was planning a major move, a bold power grab that would solidify his control over the entire city's underworld. He was negotiating a deal with a powerful international crime syndicate, a deal that involved the trafficking of illegal weapons and drugs on a massive scale. Bianca realized that this was her opportunity. If she could expose Matteo's plans, if she could bring him down, she could not only free herself from his control, but also avenge her family's downfall. She began to gather evidence, meticulously documenting Matteo's activities, collecting names, dates, locations, anything that could be used against him. She knew that it was a dangerous game, That one wrong move could cost her her life, but she was determined to see it through. One evening, while Matteo was out attending a meeting, Bianca slipped into his study. The room was dimly lit, the only light source coming from a desk lamp and the faint glow of the city lights filtering through the windows. The air was thick with the scent of leather, cigars, and expensive cologne. She searched through his desk drawers, his filing cabinets, his computer files, her heart pounding in her chest. She found several documents that detailed his illicit activities, including financial records, contracts, and correspondence with his criminal associates. She also found a hidden safe, concealed behind a large painting on the wall. She knew that this was where he kept his most sensitive information, his deepest secrets. She tried to open the safe, but it was protected by a complex combination lock. She tried several combinations based on dates and numbers that she had observed him using, but nothing worked. She was about to give up when she noticed a small, antique music box on a nearby shelf. She remembered seeing Matteo open it once, playing a short, melancholic melody. She opened the box, and as the music played, she noticed a series of numbers engraved on the inside of the lid. She realized that these numbers might be the combination to the safe. She carefully entered the numbers into the lock, her hands trembling with anticipation. The lock clicked open, revealing a stack of documents, photographs, and a small, leather-bound journal. She quickly scanned the documents, finding evidence of Matteo's involvement in numerous crimes, including murder, extortion, and corruption. She also found photographs of him with various high-ranking officials, politicians, and law enforcement officers, all caught in compromising situations. She opened the journal, her heart pounding in her chest. The first entry was dated several years ago, shortly after Matteo had taken over his father's organization. The journal entries detailed his rise to power, his ruthless elimination of rivals, his strategic alliances, and his growing ambition. As she read further, she discovered a shocking secret. Matteo had been involved in the death of her own father. He had not simply outmaneuvered him, he had orchestrated his murder, framing the Salerni family for the crime, setting off a chain of events that had led to the destruction of the Vitali Empire. Bianca felt a surge of rage, a burning hatred towards this man who had destroyed her family, her life. She had suspected his involvement, but now she had proof. She carefully copied the documents, the photographs, and the journal entries, storing them on a small, encrypted USB drive. She replaced everything in the safe, closed the lock, and left the study, her mind racing. She knew that she had to get this information to the authorities, to someone who could bring Matteo to justice. But she also knew that she couldn't trust anyone within his organization or within the city's corrupt law enforcement agencies. The journal provided a name, an old enemy of her father, a man who may help. She had to find a way to escape, to get this evidence to the right hands. But she knew that Matteo would be watching her closely, that he would not hesitate to kill her if he suspected her betrayal. The unmasking was complete, and the consequences were dire. She needed a plan, and she needed one fast. Chapter 11. Scars that run deeper than blood. The weight of her discovery pressed down on Bianca, a suffocating burden of anger, grief, and a burning desire for revenge. Matteo's betrayal ran deeper than she could have ever imagined, a calculated, cold-blooded act that had shattered her family and stolen her future. She clutched the USB drive containing the incriminating evidence, a small, tangible symbol of her defiance, her determination to bring him down. She knew she needed an ally, someone outside of Matteo's reach, someone who could help her expose his crimes and bring him to justice. The journal had mentioned the name of a man named Riccardo D'Angelo, a former rival of her father's, a man who had been forced into exile after a bloody feud with the Vitali family. D'Angelo, according to the journal, had always suspected Matteo's involvement in her father's death, but he had lacked the proof to act. Bianca realized that D'Angelo might be her only hope. He had the resources, the connections, and the motivation to take on Matteo. But reaching him would be dangerous, a risky gamble that could cost her her life. She began to plan her escape, meticulously plotting every detail, anticipating every possible obstacle. She knew that Matteo's surveillance was relentless, that his men were always watching her, monitoring her every move. She had to find a way to slip away unnoticed, to disappear without a trace. She started by subtly altering her routine, creating small, seemingly insignificant deviations that would, over time, make her movements less predictable. She took walks in different parts of the garden, visited the library at unusual hours, and even feigned an interest in learning to cook, spending time in the kitchen with Sophia, the only member of the household staff she felt she could somewhat trust. She also began to subtly gather information about Mateo's security measures, his travel schedule, his blind spots. She observed the guards' routines, their shift changes, their weaknesses. She learned that Mateo had a regular meeting every Wednesday afternoon with his financial advisor, a meeting that took place outside of the estate, in a secure office building in the city center. This, she realized, was her opportunity. She would use Mateo's absence to make her escape, to contact D'Angelo and deliver the evidence that would bring him down. She confided in Sophia, revealing her plan in hushed whispers, late at night, in the privacy of the kitchen. Sophia, initially shocked and fearful, eventually agreed to help. She had always been loyal to the Vitali family, and she had grown increasingly uneasy with Mateo's ruthlessness, his cold-blooded disregard for human life. Sophia provided Bianca with a small, untraceable cell phone, a change of clothes, and a modest amount of cash. She also gave her the contact information for a trusted associate, a former driver for the Vitali family, who could help her get out of the city undetected. The day of Mateo's meeting arrived, and Bianca felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and excitement. She knew that this was her only chance, that failure was not an option. She waited until Mateo had left the estate. Then, following Sophia's instructions, she slipped out of the villa through a back entrance, avoiding the security cameras and the watchful eyes of the guards. She changed into the nondescript clothes Sophia had provided, blending in with the crowds on the streets. She made her way to a prearranged location, a small, unassuming cafe in a quiet neighborhood, where she met with Sophia's contact, a gruff, middle-aged man named Marco. Marco, a former driver for her father, had always been loyal to the Vitali family. He greeted her with a mixture of concern and determination. "Signorina Bianca," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We must hurry. Mateo's men will be looking for you soon." They drove in silence, Marco navigating the city streets with practiced ease, avoiding the main thoroughfares, sticking to back alleys and side streets. Bianca clutched the USB drive in her pocket, her heart pounding in her chest. They reached the outskirts of the city, where Marco had arranged for a small, private plane to take Bianca to a remote location where she could contact D'Angelo. The location was somewhere in the countryside, a neutral area. As they were about to board the plane, Bianca felt a sudden, sharp pain in her shoulder. She cried out, stumbling, turning to see one of Mateo's men, his face contorted with rage, holding a silenced pistol. Marco reacted instantly, pulling out his own weapon and firing at the assailant. The man fell to the ground, his gun clattering on the pavement. Bianca, clutching her wounded shoulder, felt a surge of fear, but also a renewed determination. She had come too far to give up now. The scars from her past, and this new one, were fuel. "Go, Signorina," Marco shouted, pushing her towards the plane. "I'll hold them off." Bianca hesitated, her eyes filled with concern for Marco, but she knew that she had to escape, to deliver the evidence to D'Angelo. She boarded the plane, her heart pounding in her chest, leaving Marco to face Mateo's men alone. The plane taxied quickly. She would not waste this chance. Chapter 12. The Price of Loyalty and Freedom. The small plane soared through the night sky, carrying Bianca away from the city, away from Mateo's reach. Her shoulder throbbed with pain, but she ignored it, her mind focused on the task ahead. She had to reach Riccardo D'Angelo, deliver the evidence, and bring Mateo to justice. She looked out the window at the receding city lights, a vast, glittering expanse that had once represented her home, her family, her entire world. Now, it was a symbol of betrayal, of loss, of a life shattered by violence and greed. She thought of Marco, the loyal driver who had risked his life to help her escape. She hoped he was safe, that he had managed to evade Matteo's men. She owed him a debt she could never repay. She also thought of Sophia, the kind, courageous woman who had been like a second mother to her. Sophia had remained behind, at the villa, knowing that she would face Matteo's wrath. Bianca prayed that she would be safe, that Matteo would not harm her. The plane landed at a small, remote airstrip in the heart of the countryside. A car was waiting for her, a nondescript sedan, driven by a man she didn't recognize. He greeted her with a curt nod, his expression unreadable. "Signorina Vitali?" he asked, his voice low and gruff. "Yes," she replied, her hand instinctively reaching for the USB drive in her pocket. He gestured for her to get in the car, and they drove in silence, the only sound the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. Bianca felt a sense of unease, a feeling of being watched, assessed. She didn't know this man, didn't know if she could trust him. They arrived at a secluded villa, nestled in the rolling hills, surrounded by vineyards and olive groves. The villa was old but well-maintained, a testament to a different kind of power, a different kind of wealth. The man led her inside, to a large, dimly lit study, filled with leather-bound books and antique furniture. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. A figure rose from a chair in front of the fire, a tall, imposing man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes.
Riccardo D'Angelo.
He looked older than Bianca remembered, his face lined with wrinkles, his body bearing the scars of a life lived on the edge. But his eyes still held the same intensity, the same fire that had made him a formidable rival to her father. "Bianca Vitali," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I've been expecting you." Bianca met his gaze, her own expression determined. "Signor D'Angelo," she replied, her voice steady. "I have something you need to see." She handed him the USB drive, her hand trembling slightly. D'Angelo took the drive, his eyes searching hers, probing for any sign of deception, any hint of weakness. He plugged the drive into a laptop on his desk, and the screen flickered to life, displaying the incriminating evidence. Bianca had collected documents, photographs, journal entries, all detailing Matteo's crimes, his involvement in her father's murder. D'Angelo studied the evidence for a long time, his expression unreadable. The silence in the room was heavy, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire and the soft hum of the laptop. Finally, he looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. "So," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The serpent finally reveals his true colors." He paused, his gaze locking with Bianca's. "You've done a brave thing, Signorina," he said. "A dangerous thing. Matteo Greco will not let this go unpunished." Bianca nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of her actions. "I know," she replied softly, "but I had to do it. For my family. For justice."
D'Angelo smiled, a grim, humorless smile.
"Justice," he repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "In our world, justice is a rare commodity. But sometimes we can create our own." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "I will help you, Bianca," he said. "I will use this evidence to bring Matteo down. But it will not be easy. It will be a war. And there will be casualties." Bianca met his gaze, her own eyes filled with determination. "I'm ready," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm not afraid." D'Angelo nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes.
"Good," he said.
"Because the price of loyalty and freedom, in this world, is often paid in blood." He rose and gestured for her to follow. There was a war room and a fight ahead. She was no longer alone, but the cost would be steep. Chapter 13. A glimmer of hope in the darkness. The alliance between Bianca and Riccardo D'Angelo was forged in secrecy, a pact between two former enemies united by a common goal, the destruction of Matteo Greco. D'Angelo's villa became a war room, a hub of clandestine activity, where they plotted their strategy, gathered intelligence, and prepared for the inevitable confrontation. D'Angelo, despite his age, was a formidable opponent. He had a network of informants, loyal followers who had remained hidden, waiting for an opportunity to strike back at Matteo. He also had connections in the legal and political spheres, individuals who had been wronged by Matteo, who were willing to provide information and support, albeit discreetly. Bianca, despite her initial apprehension, proved to be a valuable asset. She had an intimate knowledge of Matteo's operations, his weaknesses, his blind spots. She also had a fierce determination, a burning desire for revenge that fueled her every action. They spent hours poring over the evidence Bianca had collected, analyzing Matteo's financial records, his communication logs, his network of associates. They identified key individuals within his organization who might be vulnerable to pressure, who might be willing to turn against him. They also discovered that Matteo was planning a major shipment of illegal weapons, a deal that would solidify his power and make him virtually untouchable. This, they realized, was their opportunity. If they could intercept the shipment, expose Matteo's involvement, they could cripple his organization and bring him down. But it was a dangerous gamble. Matteo's security was tight, his men loyal and ruthless. They would need to be meticulous, to plan every detail, to anticipate every possible contingency. Bianca, despite the danger, felt a glimmer of hope in the darkness. For the first time since her family's downfall, she felt a sense of purpose, a sense of control. She was no longer a victim, a pawn in Matteo's game. She was a fighter, a warrior, determined to reclaim her life and avenge her family. She also found herself drawn to D'Angelo, to his strength, his intelligence, his unwavering resolve. He was a man of honor, a man who had suffered greatly, but who had never lost his sense of justice, his commitment to his principles. One evening, as they were working late in the study, D'Angelo looked at Bianca, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and admiration. "You're a brave woman, Bianca," he said, his voice soft. "You remind me of your mother." Bianca felt a lump form in her throat. She had rarely spoken of her mother, the pain of her loss still too raw. "My mother was a strong woman," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "She taught me to be resilient, to never give up." D'Angelo nodded, his gaze distant, lost in memories. "She was a remarkable woman," he said. "She had a grace, a dignity, that was rare in our world. She saved my life once." Bianca looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" she asked. D'Angelo hesitated, then told her the story. Years ago, during a bloody feud between the Vitali and D'Angelo families, Matteo's father, a cruel and ruthless man, had ordered D'Angelo's assassination. Isabella, Bianca's mother, had learned the plot and had secretly warned D'Angelo, giving him the chance to escape. "She risked her own life to save mine," D'Angelo said, his voice filled with emotion. "She believed that even in our world, there could be honor, there could be compassion. She believed in redemption." Bianca felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of pride, grief, and a renewed determination. Her mother's legacy, her courage, her compassion, lived on in her. "I will not let her down," Bianca said, her voice unwavering. "I will finish what she started. I will bring Matteo to justice." D'Angelo smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "I know you will, Bianca," he said, "and I will be by your side, every step of the way." The glimmer of hope, fueled by her mother's memory and this new alliance, burned brighter. It was a fragile thing, but it was there. And it strengthened her. Chapter 14. The Threads of Fate Entwined. As the plan to intercept Matteo's weapons shipment took shape, Bianca found herself spending more and more time with D'Angelo. They worked side by side, their days filled with strategic discussions, whispered conversations, and the constant, underlying tension of impending danger. She learned more about his past, about the brutal feud between his family and the Vitales, a feud that had claimed the lives of many on both sides. She saw the scars he carried, both physical and emotional, the reminders of a life lived on the edge of violence and betrayal. She also saw the kindness in his eyes, the compassion that he tried to hide beneath the gruff exterior. He treated her with respect, with a genuine concern for her well-being that went beyond their shared goal of bringing down Matteo. She, in turn, found herself drawn to his strength, his wisdom, his unwavering sense of honor. He was a man of his word, a man who valued loyalty above all else. He reminded her of her father, but without the arrogance, the ruthlessness, the fatal flaws that had led to his downfall. One evening, after a long day of planning, they found themselves alone in the study, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. D'Angelo was studying a map of the city, tracing the route of the planned weapons shipment with his finger. Bianca watched him, her mind filled with a mix of emotions: fear, determination, and a growing sense of something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. A connection. A spark of attraction. "You're quiet tonight, Bianca," D'Angelo said, breaking the silence, his eyes meeting hers. She shrugged, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I'm just thinking," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "About what?" he asked, his voice soft, his gaze probing. She hesitated, then looked up, meeting his eyes. "About everything," she said. "About my family, about Matteo, about the future." D'Angelo nodded, his expression understanding. "The future is uncertain, Bianca," he said, "especially in our world. But we can shape it, we can influence it. We can choose our own path." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "You've made a choice, Bianca," he continued. "A brave choice. You've chosen to fight, to stand up for what you believe in. And I admire you for that." Bianca felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of gratitude, of affection. "Thank you, Ricardo," she said softly. "For everything." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened his features, making him look younger, less hardened. "You don't need to thank me, Bianca," he said. "We're in this together. We're family now." The word family hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Bianca felt a lump form in her throat. She had lost her family, her home, everything she held dear. But she had found something else, something unexpected. A connection, a bond, with this man who had once been her father's enemy. She reached out, her hand covering his on the map. He didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined, a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose, their growing trust, their affection. "We'll get through this, Bianca," D'Angelo said, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. "Together." Bianca nodded, her heart filled with a renewed sense of hope. She knew that the road ahead would be dangerous, that there would be challenges, setbacks, perhaps even losses. But she also knew that she was not alone. She had D'Angelo by her side, and that made all the difference. The threads of fate, once tangled and frayed, were now entwined, weaving a new pattern, a new future. A future where justice might prevail, where loyalty could be found in unexpected places, where even in the darkest of times, love and hope could blossom. She felt his hand tighten on hers, a spark. And she wasn't afraid. Chapter 15. Revelations under a blood moon. The night of the planned interception arrived, a night cloaked in an eerie silence, punctuated by a blood-red moon hanging low in the sky. Bianca and D'Angelo, along with a small, hand-picked team of D'Angelo's most trusted men, were positioned near the docks, where the weapons shipment was scheduled to arrive. Tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation and the ever-present threat of violence. Bianca, dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, her heart pounding in her chest, felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and determination. She clutched a small, concealed weapon, a gift from D'Angelo, a symbol of her new role, her transformation from victim to warrior. D'Angelo, his face grim, his eyes scanning the surroundings, gave the final instructions. "Remember," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Our goal is to intercept the shipment, not to engage in unnecessary bloodshed. But be prepared for anything. Matteo's men are ruthless. They will not hesitate to kill." Bianca nodded, her gaze unwavering. She had come to terms with the risks, with the possibility of death. She was ready to fight, to defend herself, to avenge her family. They waited in silence, hidden in the shadows, watching the docks. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension. Finally, a large cargo ship appeared on the horizon, its silhouette a dark, ominous shape against the blood-red moon. The ship slowly approached the docks, its engines rumbling softly. As the ship docked, a group of men emerged, Mateo's men, heavily armed and alert. They began to unload the crates, large, wooden boxes that contained the deadly cargo. D'Angelo gave the signal, and his men moved swiftly and silently, surrounding the docks, cutting off any escape routes. Bianca, her heart pounding in her chest, followed closely behind D'Angelo, her weapon drawn. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Gunfire erupted, shattering the silence of the night. Bianca found herself in the midst of chaos, dodging bullets, firing her own weapon, her movements guided by instinct and adrenaline. She saw one of Mateo's men aiming at D'Angelo, his finger tightening on the trigger. Without thinking, she raised her weapon and fired, hitting the man in the shoulder. He cried out, dropping his gun, clutching his wound. D'Angelo turned, his eyes meeting hers, a flicker of surprise and gratitude in his gaze. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her action, her courage. The fight continued, a fierce, desperate struggle for control of the shipment. Bianca fought with a ferocity she never knew she possessed, driven by a burning desire for revenge, for justice. Suddenly, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Mateo! He stood at the edge of the docks, his face a mask of cold fury, his eyes blazing with anger. Bianca, he said, his voice a low, menacing growl. You betrayed me. Bianca met his gaze, her own expression defiant. You betrayed me, Mateo, she replied, her voice steady, her weapon aimed directly at him. You betrayed my family. You murdered my father. Mateo laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. Your father was a weakling, he said. He deserved to die. And you are a fool to think you can defeat me. He raised his own weapon, aiming at Bianca. But before he could fire, D'Angelo stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. This is between you and me, Mateo, D'Angelo said, his voice calm, his gaze unwavering. Leave her out of it. Mateo hesitated, his eyes flickering between D'Angelo and Bianca. He seemed to be weighing his options, calculating the odds. Then, a shot rang out, and D'Angelo stumbled, clutching his chest. Bianca screamed, rushing to his side, her heart filled with terror. D'Angelo, his face pale, his breathing labored, looked at Bianca, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and regret. I'm sorry, Bianca, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I should have protected you. Bianca, tears streaming down her face, cradled his head in her lap. No, Ricardo, she said, her voice choked with emotion. You saved me. You gave me a chance. He smiled weakly, his hand reaching up to touch her cheek. You are strong, Bianca, he whispered. You will survive. His hand fell limp, his eyes closed, his breathing stopped. D'Angelo was gone. Bianca, overcome with grief and rage, rose to her feet, her weapon still clutched in her hand. She looked at Mateo, her eyes blazing with hatred. You will pay for this, Mateo, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. You will pay for everything. The blood moon seemed to reflect her fury. It was a vow and a promise. Chapter 16. The lioness bares her claws. D'Angelo's death ignited a fire within Bianca, a cold, burning rage that consumed her grief and fueled her determination. She would not let his sacrifice be in vain. She would avenge him, and she would bring Mateo down, no matter the cost. The remaining members of D'Angelo's team, shaken but resolute, rallied around Bianca. They had witnessed her courage, her unwavering loyalty to D'Angelo, and they recognized her as their new leader. They would follow her, fight by her side, to the bitter end. The battle at the docks continued, but the tide had turned. Mateo's men, demoralized by D'Angelo's death and surprised by Bianca's fierce resistance, began to lose ground. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. Bianca, fueled by adrenaline and a burning desire for revenge, fought with a ferocity that surprised even herself. She moved with a deadly grace, her movements precise, her aim true. She was no longer the frightened, vulnerable woman who had arrived at Matteo's estate months ago. She was a warrior, a lioness protecting her pride. Matteo, seeing his plans unraveling, his forces collapsing around him, realized that he had underestimated Bianca. He had seen her as a pawn, a tool to be used and discarded. He had not anticipated her strength, her resilience, her capacity for vengeance. He tried to escape, to disappear into the chaos, but Bianca was relentless. She pursued him through the maze of crates and shipping containers, her weapon drawn, her eyes fixed on his retreating figure. She cornered him near the edge of the docks, his back to the water, his face a mask of fear and desperation. He raised his weapon, but his hand was trembling, his aim unsteady. "It's over, Matteo," Bianca said, her voice cold, her gaze unwavering. "You've lost." Matteo sneered, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. "You think you've won, Bianca?" he said. "You think this is over? You're wrong. I have connections, power you can't touch me."
Bianca smiled, a grim, humorless smile.
"You're the one who's wrong, Matteo," she said. "Your power is an illusion. Your connections are worthless. You're alone." She raised her weapon, aiming directly at his heart. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. But Bianca hesitated. She looked at him, at his fear, his desperation, his vulnerability. She saw not just a ruthless criminal, but a broken man, a man consumed by his own ambition, his own demons. She lowered her weapon. She couldn't do it. She couldn't kill him in cold blood. It wasn't in her nature. It wasn't what D'Angelo would have wanted. "I'm not like you, Matteo," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of contempt and pity. "I won't stoop to your level. I won't become a murderer." She turned to her men, who were watching her with a mixture of surprise and respect. "Take him," she said. "Take him to the authorities. Let them deal with him." Matteo's men, seeing their leader defeated, surrendered without a fight. They were disarmed and taken into custody. Bianca watched as Matteo was led away, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a shadow of his former self, a broken, defeated man. She felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, a profound sense of loss, but also a sense of closure. She had avenged D'Angelo. She had stopped Matteo. She had reclaimed her life. She looked out at the water, at the first rays of dawn breaking through the darkness. A new day was beginning, a new chapter in her life. A chapter filled with uncertainty, but also with hope. She had bared her claws, she had fought, and she had won. But the victory was bittersweet, tinged with the pain of loss, the scars of battle. The lioness had protected her pride, but at a great cost. It was time to rebuild. Chapter 17. A love forged in fire and fear. The aftermath of the docks confrontation was a whirlwind of activity. The authorities, alerted by D'Angelo's contacts, arrived to take Matteo and his men into custody. The evidence Bianca had provided, coupled with the testimony of D'Angelo's loyalists, was overwhelming. Matteo's empire crumbled, his carefully constructed network of power and corruption exposed and dismantled. Bianca found herself thrust into the spotlight, hailed as a hero, a symbol of resistance against the city's criminal underworld. She was interviewed by journalists, praised by politicians, and celebrated by the public. But she took no pleasure in the attention. She was still grieving D'Angelo, still reeling from the violence and betrayal she had endured. She retreated to D'Angelo's villa, seeking solace in the quiet solitude of the countryside. She spent her days wandering the grounds, tending to the gardens, reading in the library, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. She found herself thinking about D'Angelo constantly, about his kindness, his strength, his unwavering sense of honor. She realized that she had fallen in love with him, a love born of shared danger, mutual respect, and a deep, unspoken connection. It was a love that could never be fully realized, a love cut short by violence and betrayal. But it was a love that had changed her, transformed her, given her the strength to fight, to survive, to reclaim her life. One evening, as she was sitting by the fire in the study, she noticed a small, wooden box on a shelf. It was the same music box she had found in Mateo's study, the one that had contained the combination to his safe. She opened the box, and the melancholic melody filled the room. She remembered the day she had found it, the day she had discovered Mateo's betrayal, the day her life had changed forever. As the music played, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small, folded piece of paper tucked into the lining of the box. She carefully unfolded the paper, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a letter, written in D'Angelo's handwriting, addressed to her. Bianca, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. It means that I have failed to protect you, failed to keep my promise. I want you to know that I have no regrets. I would gladly give my life for you, for the chance to right the wrongs of the past, to bring justice to our world. I know that you are strong, Bianca. You are resilient, courageous, and compassionate. You have the heart of a lioness and the soul of an angel. Do not let grief consume you. Do not let hatred poison your spirit. Live your life, Bianca. Find happiness, find love. Build a better world, a world where justice prevails, where honor matters, where kindness triumphs over cruelty. I will always be with you, Bianca. In your heart, in your memories, in the spirit of the fight we shared. With all my love, Ricardo tears streamed down Bianca's face as she read the letter. It was a final message from the man she had loved, a testament to his character, his courage, his unwavering belief in her. She clutched the letter to her chest, her heart aching with grief, but also filled with a renewed sense of purpose. She would honor his memory, she would live up to his expectations, she would build the better world he had envisioned. She realized that love, even love forged in fire and fear, could be a source of strength, a guiding light in the darkness. It could inspire courage, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to justice. She would carry D'Angelo's love with her, always, a reminder of the sacrifices he had made, the hope he had given her, the future he had helped her create. She had tears, yes, but also strength. It was time to look forward. Chapter 18. The Cost of Redemption's Path. The legal proceedings against Mateo dragged on for months, a complex and arduous process that tested Bianca's patience and resilience. She testified before grand juries, provided evidence to prosecutors, and faced relentless questioning from Mateo's lawyers, who tried to discredit her, to paint her as a vengeful, unreliable witness. But Bianca held firm. She recounted the events of the past months with unwavering clarity, detailing Mateo's crimes, his betrayal, his involvement in her father's murder. She presented the evidence she had gathered, the documents, the photographs, the journal entries, all of which corroborated her testimony. Mateo, meanwhile, remained defiant, maintaining his innocence, claiming that he was a victim of a conspiracy, a vendetta orchestrated by D'Angelo and Bianca. He hired the best lawyers money could buy, using his remaining wealth and influence to try to sway the outcome of the trial. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. The testimony of D'Angelo's loyalists, the witnesses Bianca had brought forward, the forensic evidence, all pointed to his guilt. The trial became a media sensation, a public spectacle that captivated the city. Bianca, once a reclusive figure, was thrust into the spotlight, her every move scrutinized, her every word analyzed. She endured the pressure with grace and dignity, refusing to be intimidated by Mateo's threats or his lawyer's tactics. She was determined to see justice served, to ensure that Mateo paid for his crimes. As the trial neared its conclusion, Bianca found herself reflecting on the cost of redemption, the price she had paid for her freedom, for her revenge. She had lost her family, her home, her innocence. She had been forced to confront the darkness within herself, to embrace violence, to become a warrior. She had also found love, a love that had been tragically cut short, but a love that had given her strength, purpose, and a renewed sense of hope. She thought of D'Angelo, of his sacrifice, his unwavering belief in her. She knew that he would have been proud of her, proud of the woman she had become. One evening, as she was preparing for another day in court, she received a visit from Sophia, the loyal housekeeper who had helped her escape from Matteo's estate. Sophia had been living in hiding, fearing Matteo's retaliation, but she had decided to come forward, to testify on Bianca's behalf. "Signorina Bianca," Sophia said, her voice filled with emotion. I could not stay away. I had to tell the truth. I had to honor Don Ricardo's memory." Bianca embraced Sophia, tears streaming down her face. "Grazie, Sophia," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for everything." Sophia's testimony was a powerful moment in the trial, a testament to Bianca's character, to D'Angelo's courage, to Matteo's ruthlessness. It was a turning point, a moment that sealed Matteo's fate. The jury, after days of deliberation, returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Matteo was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Bianca felt a wave of relief wash over her, a sense of closure, but also a profound sadness. Justice had been served, but the cost had been high. The scars, she thought, would take more time. Perhaps they would never truly fade. She accepted this. Chapter 19. When all masks fall away. With Matteo's conviction and imprisonment, a chapter of Bianca's life closed, a chapter filled with violence, betrayal, and loss. But it was also a chapter that had forged her into a stronger, more resilient woman, a woman who had faced her demons and emerged victorious. She decided to remain in D'Angelo's villa, transforming it into a sanctuary, a place of healing and renewal. She honored D'Angelo's memory by establishing a foundation in his name, a foundation dedicated to helping victims of organized crime, to providing support and resources for those who had been marginalized and exploited. She surrounded herself with loyal friends and allies, the people who had stood by her during the darkest of times. Sophia became her confidant, her companion, her family. Marco, the driver who had helped her escape, became her trusted protector, her right-hand man. She also reconnected with some of her father's former associates, the ones who had remained loyal to the Vitali family, the ones who had disapproved of Matteo's ruthless tactics. She offered them a chance to rebuild, to create a new kind of organization, one based on honor, respect, and a commitment to justice. Some accepted her offer, grateful for the opportunity to redeem themselves, to distance themselves from Matteo's legacy. Others, hardened by years of violence and corruption, declined, unable to adapt to a new way of life. Bianca understood their choices. She knew that the world of the mafia was a complex and treacherous place, where loyalty was often fleeting, where trust was a rare commodity. She focused on building a new future, a future where she could use her skills, her knowledge, her experience, to make a positive impact on the world. She became an advocate for victims' rights, a voice for the voiceless, a champion of justice. She also began to explore her own identity, to discover who she was outside of the shadow of her family's legacy, outside of the role she had been forced to play. She took up painting, finding solace in the creative process, expressing her emotions through colors and textures. She traveled, exploring new cultures, meeting new people, broadening her horizons. She learned to live with the scars of the past, to accept the pain of loss, to embrace the uncertainty of the future. She realized that healing was a journey, not a destination, a process of growth, transformation, and self-discovery. One evening, as she was walking in the gardens, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, she felt a sense of peace, a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. She realized that she had finally found her place in the world, her purpose, her identity. She was no longer the frightened, vulnerable woman who had been forced to make a deal with the devil. She was a survivor, a warrior, a leader, a woman who had faced the darkness and emerged into the light. All the masks she had worn, the roles she had played, had fallen away. She was simply Bianca, a woman who had loved, lost, fought, and won. A woman who had found strength in vulnerability, courage in fear, and hope in despair. The woman she always was, finally revealed. And it was beautiful. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. Years passed, and Bianca solidified her position as a respected and influential figure, not only in her city, but also internationally. The D'Angelo Foundation flourished, providing vital support to victims of crime and advocating for systemic change. Bianca's life was full, purpose-driven, and outwardly peaceful. Yet, the echoes of the past, particularly Matteo's lingering shadow, remained. One spring morning, Bianca received an unexpected summons. Matteo Greco, from prison, had requested a meeting. The request was unusual, unsettling, and Bianca considered refusing. But a part of her, the part that sought complete closure, the part that still held a sliver of unresolved curiosity, compelled her to accept. She arrived at the maximum security prison, a stark, imposing structure that contrasted sharply with the vibrant life she had built outside its walls. The visit was conducted under heavy security in a sterile, monitored room. Matteo, seated on the other side of a thick glass partition, looked older, his once sharp features softened by time and confinement. His eyes, however, still held a flicker of the intensity, the cunning, that had defined him. "Bianca," he said, his voice raspy through the intercom. "Thank you for coming." "Why did you ask to see me, Matteo?" Bianca replied, her voice calm, her expression neutral. He hesitated, his gaze searching hers. I wanted to see you," he said. "To apologize." Bianca raised an eyebrow, skepticism evident in her expression. "Apologize?" she repeated. "After everything you've done?" Matteo nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands, which were clasped tightly together. "I know it's not enough," he said. "I know I can never undo the pain I've caused you, your family, D'Angelo." He paused, his voice filled with a mixture of regret and something else. Something that sounded like genuine remorse. "I've had a lot of time to think, Bianca," he continued, "to reflect on my life, my choices. I was wrong. I was consumed by ambition, by greed, by a thirst for power. I lost myself." Bianca remained silent, listening, observing. She had learned to read people, to decipher their unspoken emotions, to see through their masks. And she saw something in Matteo's eyes, something that suggested his apology might be sincere. "D'Angelo," Matteo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He was a good man. A better man than I ever was. He deserved better." Bianca felt a pang of emotion, a flicker of sadness for the man she had loved, the man who had sacrificed his life for her. "He did," she replied softly. Matteo looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I know you can never forgive me, Bianca," he said. "But I needed to tell you I'm sorry. I truly am." Bianca studied him for a long moment, her mind racing. Could she believe him? Could she trust him? Was this another manipulation? Another attempt to deceive her? She realized that it didn't matter. Whether his apology was genuine or not, it changed nothing. It couldn't bring back her family. It couldn't bring back D'Angelo. It couldn't erase the scars of the past. But it could offer her something else. Closure. A chance to finally move on, to leave the past behind, to embrace the future. "Thank you, Matteo," she said, her voice steady, her expression resolute. "I appreciate your words." She paused, then added, "I forgive you." The words were not easy to say, but they were necessary. Not for Matteo, but for herself. Forgiveness was not about condoning his actions. It was about releasing herself from the burden of anger, of hatred, of the past. Matteo looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. He seemed to understand, to appreciate the weight of her words. Bianca rose to leave. "Goodbye, Matteo," she said. He nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer. "Goodbye, Bianca," he replied softly. Bianca walked out of the prison, leaving Matteo behind, leaving the past behind. She stepped out into the sunlight, into the vibrant life she had built, a life filled with purpose, with love, with hope. The final confrontation had not been a battle of weapons, but a battle of hearts and loyalties. And Bianca had won. She had found peace, not in revenge, but in forgiveness. She had found strength, not in power, but in compassion. She had found herself. She had faced her final demon and laid the past to rest. All masks had fallen. All that remained was the strength of her spirit. Epilogue. The Tuscan sun warmed Bianca's face as she stood on the terrace of the villa, overlooking the rolling hills, the vineyards stretching out towards the horizon. It was the anniversary of D'Angelo's death, a day she always marked with quiet reflection, a visit to his grave, and a renewed commitment to the work of the foundation. Years had passed since Matteo's imprisonment, years filled with purpose, with healing, with the slow, steady rebuilding of a life shattered by violence and betrayal. The D'Angelo Foundation had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of resilience, the possibility of redemption. Bianca had found a measure of peace, a contentment that had eluded her for so long. She had surrounded herself with loyal friends, with a chosen family that had filled the void left by her losses. Sophia remained her constant companion, her confidant, her anchor. Marco, ever vigilant, continued to protect her, his loyalty unwavering. She had also found love again, unexpectedly, in the arms of a man who had no connection to her past, a man who saw her for who she was, not for what she had been through. Alessandro, a renowned artist, had entered her life gently, patiently, offering her a love that was kind, supportive, and free from the shadows of the past. They had married quietly in a small ceremony in the villa's gardens, surrounded by their closest friends. It was a celebration of new beginnings, of a future filled with hope and promise. As Bianca stood on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and gold, Alessandro joined her, his arm wrapping around her waist, his presence a comforting warmth. "Thinking about him?" he asked softly, his voice filled with understanding. Bianca nodded, a gentle smile touching her lips. "Yes," she replied, "but not with sadness. With gratitude. With love." Alessandro kissed her hair, his embrace tightening. "He would be proud of you, Bianca," he said. "Of everything you've accomplished." Bianca leaned into him, her heart filled with a profound sense of peace. She had honored D'Angelo's memory. She had built a better world. She had found love and happiness. She had survived. She had thrived. She had found her own redemption. The scars of the past remained, a reminder of the battles she had fought, the losses she had endured. But they were no longer wounds. They were badges of honor, symbols of strength, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The Tuscan wind whispered through the olive trees, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of laughter. Life had moved on, as it always does. But the lessons learned, the love shared, the legacy of hope would endure. The devil's deal had been broken, and in its place a new life, freely chosen, beautifully lived, had blossomed. And it was more than enough. It was everything. The end.